The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show, a truly bizarre story out of Wisconsin where there's an African-American security guard who was fired for asking a student not to call him the N-word, okay? The security guard was originally fired, and that termination has now been rescinded. And what's crazy about this is that it required the involvement of a union that represents teachers and other staff. And I don't know, Pat, if we should simply be glad that the reinstatement happened or extraordinarily horrified that it required so much in order to get the security guard rehired.
I think at first you were horrified that he was fired in the first place, but then later when they rescind it, you become glad. You're like, well, they made the wrong decision at first, but at least they brought him back. I mean, they kind of made up for it in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's a student calling him the N-word, and he says, don't call me that. And then he gets fired for saying that. And I believe that the school is saying we are not ignoring the fact that the N-word was being used by a student. We take racial slurs seriously at the school. We believe that the language has no place in school, and it simply can't be. It can't be allowed. But this is one of those bizarre things that, it's weird because I've told stories before about the school resource officer at my school in high school, and allegedly fired for an affair with a student, as I've told before. But there always seem to be issues with the school resource officer in different ways. And I don't know if you had one at your high school, Pat, but I've said before, I don't have any problem. I don't consider a school resource officer who happens to carry a gun because they are a police officer. I don't consider this the same as arming schools with a whole bunch of armed security. I think that the school resource officer can actually be a useful thing to start generating good relations between students and police at an early age. But so many anecdotally stories of issues involving school resource officers and students and the relationship to the school.
You think maybe that just has to do in part with the nature of the job? Like if you're a school resource officer, you have to deal with these situations of conflict. You have to deal with the fights and arguments. And, in this case, someone calling you an expletive and you don't necessarily respond the way that you want to because, you're a human too. You just get riled up and in the heat of the moment and you don't always act professionally. Like I think that can happen to anyone, including these school resource officers, and that can get them into trouble sometimes. Yeah,
I mean, it's not the easiest position to be in because in many places, I mean, let's be honest, in a lot of places, the school organization may look suspiciously at the police officer. Now, I don't want to say with no good reason or for good reason, for sometimes the justified belief that the presence of a school resource officer can contribute to the school to prison pipeline. And I know that this is very different in different schools. As I've said many times, I believe that most police officers are good people who get into the field for the right reasons. But it is not untrue that school resource officers can can accelerate the school to prison pipeline that can exist and can lead to kids, they are kids, getting into the criminal justice system earlier than they should or otherwise would. And so, the reality is, and I'm not placing a value judgment on it, that there is sometimes skepticism or concern about the presence of a school resource officer, and that probably contributes to some of these issues.
Don't you think they're necessary, though, because you have a collection of people that is in such a great number that maybe it requires having a police officer there? Like whenever you hold an event, like a public event that requires permits, maybe it's like a festival or something, they bring in cops there because they want to make sure that for every X number of citizens, they have one officer. If you have a school of like 1,000 people in it, wouldn't it make sense to have at least one officer there to just patrol everything and keep people safe?
Yeah, I mean, you can make the case just from like a crowd management perspective, but I get the argument on both sides. I really do. Do you want to not militarize, but do you want to introduce a background of law enforcement and policing into what is supposed to be an educational institution? On the other side, there are schools that have violence issues. There are schools where people are bringing weapons of different kinds. I could really see it both ways, and I also understand the reason why in a lot of school districts the relationship becomes strained, I guess I would say. Let's talk about drunk driving. There have been devices for a long time already that it is a sort of ignition breathalyzer. It's something that is typically only installed in vehicles where someone has previously been caught driving drunk, and as a condition of, for example, being allowed to use their car to drive only to work with an otherwise suspended license, they have to have a breathalyzer in the car that they have to blow into, and the car will not start up unless they are not above the legal limit for alcohol. And there is a proposal called the Reduce Impaired Driving for Everyone Act of 2019. If you're keeping tabs on the acronym, that works out to the RIDE Act, which would add a lot of research of funds for looking at ways to prevent drunk driving by monitoring blood alcohol levels in real time. And two Republican senators, Rick Scott of Florida and Tom Udall of New Mexico, one Republican, one Democrat rather, have introduced legislation that would make it mandatory for all new cars and trucks to come loaded with these passive alcohol detection systems by 2024, which is actually relatively soon. And we've seen the backup camera become standard on new vehicles in the same way that seatbelts were not always standard. Airbags were not always standard. A lot of different features were not always standard. And the idea here is that there would be a mandatory breathalyzer or other device that would in real time be able to track blood alcohol levels and potentially disable the vehicle in the event that someone triggers it. What do you think, Pat?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the technology isn't fully developed yet, so this like passive breathalyzer can't tell whether or not you're above 0.05 or 0.08, whatever the legal limit is in your state. But it can only tell that you've had any alcohol whatsoever. So if you had like one beer and then get behind the wheel and you're okay to drive, you're legal to drive, it may shut off on you, and we don't want that to happen. But I think ultimately we'll be able to get this working, right? I think maybe with technology progressing, we'll be able to make it so that the car can tell when you're way over the legal limit or even slightly over the legal limit and then shut down. And I think, yeah, this would be a safety feature that would help a lot of people, would save a lot of lives. I'm sure that the car industry isn't very excited to get this installed in all their vehicles because that's going to cost them money. But they also weren't very excited to install seatbelts and airbags at first. And now we just view them as standard. So I think hopefully that becomes the way of the future.
Yeah, so listen, I mean, there are going to be lots of Republicans and libertarian-minded folks who will say this is nanny state intrusion, this is coercive or oppressive business regulation, this is something that, there are people who may be not at all drunk, but because of a medication that they're on a breathalyzer, they might appear to have a blood alcohol level that would preclude them from driving. There are probably some arguments to be made. Drunk driving is such a malignancy in society that I am tempted to say that the benefits, the rewards outweigh the downsides of this because, to read about someone who's just driving home from college for Thanksgiving to visit their parents and a drunk driver who shouldn't be driving swerves over the double yellow line and hits them and kills them. These stories are so tragic, and there are so many of them that is it really that oppressive if it becomes standard to just have something that, maybe via thumbprint or some other, it might not even be a breathalyzer, some other way can detect whether you shouldn't be driving? It seems like there are so many lives that could potentially be saved with something like this.
It's an interesting trade-off that we have as a society, even allowing cars, right? Because if you allow cars, there's going to be car accidents where people die, and if you have people who are drunk getting behind the wheel, they're going to kill people in these car accidents too. And but we say that cars make our lives more convenient, allow us to get to work and to recreational activities, and so ultimately, even though some people are going to have to die in these vehicle accidents, we're ultimately as a society going to choose to have cars. But maybe we could do away with that trade-off altogether in the future. Maybe we don't have to make that sort of calculation because we'll be able to really significantly limit the amount of auto deaths that we have. And I think part of the solution to that is something like this. And the other part is just autonomous vehicles. If you have the cars driving themselves and not humans driving the cars,
Sure.
there's going to be way fewer car accidents. And that's the
I,
future.
I think one way or another, in the next 15 years, there are going to be massive, massive changes to what driving on the roads looks like. And there are a lot of possible changes that there will be. They range from automation to things like mandatory blood alcohol meters to many other things. I think that driving is going to look very, very different 15 years from now. Mitt Romney, who is the senator from Utah, Republican, former Massachusetts governor, is an interesting guy. And one of the things that it turns out he is doing is he has a sort of secret, under the radar Twitter account using the pseudonym Pierre Delecto, which is just absolutely hilarious. The username is reportedly QAWS9876. The way it was tracked down is after word got out that Mitt Romney has a secret Twitter account. He said he follows 668 Twitter accounts, and this allowed Slate's Ashley Feinberg to figure out what account Mitt Romney has. And what's interesting are some of the tweets in which Mitt Romney has involved himself, liking one tweet, I believe, that suggests the removal of Donald Trump via the 25th Amendment for being unfit. Another one is Pierre Delecto responding to Fox News anchor Brit Hume on a tweet about Mitt Romney, actually. And this is, I mean, there's just something fascinating about this, Pat. I don't even know what it is, but it is endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, it's goofy. It's like Mitt Romney's living a double life, but I think it could be a lot worse. Like instead of just liking tweets and commenting on things that other people are saying, he could be out there on Twitter just endlessly praising himself under disguise. And that wouldn't be too shocking. I'm sure there's a lot of people who would do that if they knew that they were totally undercover. But at least for now, it looks like Mitt Romney's not doing that, at least. I actually do a very similar thing, which is on my own personal YouTube account. Sometimes I'll go through the comments on David Pakman Show videos, and if they reference me or in any way, or it's just a comment I like, I do upvote them.
Right.
But I don't know if it has the same impact because I'm one of like dozens of other people who are upvoting these comments. So maybe it's not quite the same thing.
Yeah, it's not totally clear that it's the same, but I will mention, so I've mentioned on the program before that I have like a fake name that I use as a joke just in certain situations, and that fake name is Diego Kesterbaum, and I've mentioned that before, so the secret is out. I actually have another fake name now, which I'm not going to mention, which this is a very interesting story, I believe. Sam Harris suggested this to me as a security method because I was telling him about the need for certain techniques that I suspected he had already thought out, like without saying too much. And he said one of the things that he does is he has a credit card that he uses for all purchases that is a credit card issued to a fake name. Now you might say, isn't that some kind of fraud? How do you get the credit approved? A lot of credit cards allow you to add an authorized second user to your account. And because it is just your account and ultimately you're still responsible, it's your credit that's on the line, they don't go through a credit check. So you can give a credit card to someone with any name. You can call it Joe Schmo. And then when you buy something online, you can say the payment details are Joe Schmo, whatever. The idea being that stuff isn't being sent around and you don't have accounts on websites with your shipping address that have your real name. So when I started employing some of these techniques, I had to pick a new fake name, Pat, and the new one is absolutely hilarious. And I was, of course, careful for it not to be anything that could be linked back to me. But if people in the audience knew what that fake name was, I think they would be endlessly fascinated.
We'll leave it up to Sam Cedar to come up with an idea like that, and to you for following along. And
No, it was
doing
Sam Harris. Sam Harris, not Sam Cedar.
Oh, Sam Harris. Sam Harris. Okay. And well, it's interesting. So what's your other fake name? You said it was Diego Kesterbaum?
Diego Kesterbaum, yes. A Hispanic Jew.
Okay. Right. Hispanic Jew. And Mitt Romney's is Pierre Delecto, which is like someone who's maybe half French, half Spanish.
I don't know that Delecto is necessarily Spanish. I think Delecto.
I don't know if it's not a real word, right? But it kind of sounds like it could be Spanish.
Yeah.
Whatever. I don't know. Like, I don't know why people decide for whatever reason when they coming up with these fake names to combine like where these names are coming from. But apparently you did the same thing.
Exactly right. And my new name, I also kept in mind with my new fake name that it would be better for it not to be anything notably Jewish or Hispanic, because somebody who is extraordinarily clever might be able to figure it out. Anyway, Mitt Romney's secret Twitter account has indeed been outed. He's admitted that it is him. He actually said in French, c'est moi, when Ashley Feinberg confronted him about it, playing up the Pierre Delecto persona, I guess we would say. That does it for today. We will have a new show and a new bonus show tomorrow. Thanks to everybody who has signed up over the last couple of weeks, including folks signing up with the massive membership drive that we did over the last weekend. A lot of good things to come, I promise you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.